from your favorite Grasslands PR team. This month we're back with another episode of The Best Biome. I'm Nicole.
I'm Alan.
And I'm Rachel. And today's episode is all about why you should be birding all winter.
Oh. Yeah.
But first, we have some Giving Tuesday news because, it's that time of year where you're so thankful for podcasts that you give money to people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And who better to give your money to than your favorite Grasslands PR team?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of ways to give this year. We have our merch store. We have our donor box. We have a Facebook fundraiser going on if you're a fundraiser kind of person. If you have CashApp on your phone, wow, you can just search GrasslandGroupies and you'll find us. Give us $2, give us $5. Right now, we do have a generous donor actually doubling donations, so your $5 turns into $10. Whoa.
Nice.
So,
Do they want to be named?
I didn't ask.
Okay, well, we'll keep them anonymous. But
Mysterious donor. Thank you.
Mysterious supporter. Anyway, thank you guys for all of your support
Yes.
over the years. It helps us out a lot, and
Absolutely.
our growth in the last year alone has been just absolutely insane. So we're excited about the future, and we are very grateful for those of you who are supporting us through it all.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about some birds.
Birds.
A lot of times when we talk about birds, we are thinking about summer birds. We're excited for the tropical, colorful spectacles. We're excited for the singing, the displays, the babies. Look, I get it. There's a lot to love about summer birds. But winter changes everything for birds. The summer birds abandon us. They're gone. But there's a lot of other birds that join us for the winter from the Arctic.
Yes.
And the way that birds exist in the world is completely different. There's no leaves on the trees, so it makes it way easier to find them unless you're in a place with a ton of evergreens, I guess. That there are places like that exist.
Yes.
But deciduous leaves, gone. Birds, easy to stalk. There's new cooperation we see in birds, new behaviors, new coloration, in addition to that new roster. A great example of how winter completely shifts bird behaviors comes from our wonderful red-winged blackbirds, one of the more common birds across the U.S., heavily associated with fields and grasslands and marshes. And all summer long, those males are defending territories and mates so extremely, they will spend more than a quarter of their daylight hours attacking things. That includes other males, predators, even a stray horse that gets too close and they're like, all right, Buster, time for you to mosey on out of here. They'll attack people. They spend more than a quarter of daylight hours just attacking things. So they're extremely territorial.
Wow.
They
Gotta let 'em
hate
know. Yeah.
other males. Yeah. And they are very polygynous, so they will have a lot of females in their territory. That's, fine. But they're bullies. Winter changes things, right? Okay, because winter flocks of red-winged blackbirds specifically can be several million birds. So they drop all of that antagonistic behavior and join up with members of their own species and other species. And those millions of birds will, even if they disperse during the day, reform the flocks at night.
Nice.
So it's a very different time.
Every time I think of millions of birds in one place, I can't really picture it. Like, it's such a amazing amount of animals in one area. It's so weird.
Yeah.
It's
No.
a true spectacle getting to see those types of birds. If you live in this area, Quivira National Wildlife Refuge is a great place to see flocks of millions of blackbirds.
Are these I wonder if these are detectable on radar
For
in
sure.
the same way that bats are, like bat colonies? Ooh.
Yeah, there's definitely bird flocks detected on radar. It's very pronounced in migration. I don't know about, winter bird flocks. I
Just
haven't
hanging out.
specifically seen
Yeah.
that, but I imagine it pops up on radar if there's that many of them.
That's really nice. That's great that they're able to, squash the beef and exist, millions of them all together as buddies. Well, not necessarily buddies, but, not sworn enemies, right?
Yeah.
It's encouraging.
It is encouraging. And, it kind of just shows that cooperation has an important place in nature just as much as beating up all your rivals, and in winter, things are tough and it's important to start cooperating to get through it all together.
Yes. Together we survive.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is kind of interesting to think about. Like, there's less food in winter, but they're in these giant flocks. So
that actually brings up a great point because I want to spend a minute talking about flocking behavior because that is one of the hallmarks of winter. A lot of species form flocks that otherwise do not at all during the summer. In fact, most birds don't form flocks in the summer, like period, full stop, and then completely switch to that sort of lifestyle. So what are the advantages, disadvantages, like criteria for forming flocks? What do they do in flocks all day? Great questions. I do want to point out that flocking behavior in birds has like a very wide range of how it, comes across. Like it is most often a pretty flexible behavior. Sometimes a flock will just be a grouping of birds, and as like the flock kind of moves through different territories, like new birds will join in and old birds will fall off, and it's like a pretty loose aggregate. In other bird species, it can be like sort of a closed membership situation where a flock gets together and they're like fighting off other intruders, and like you have to earn your spot in the flock. So pretty wide range there. The advantages of forming a flock are cooperative foraging. So yes, food can be limiting, but with more birds looking out for food, more opportunities to find food. It's also safer to be in a flock. So that's a great advantage. Obvious disadvantages include competition for food because, millions of birds hanging out. That's why a lot of those huge flocks, like the ones we just talked about, will disperse during the day and into smaller groups that will go out and forage in like smaller chunks. And then the giant aggregate will reform at night for roosting. Disadvantages also include disease. So it gives more opportunities for diseases to spread. And also it leads to more fighting because birds like to maintain personal space and also squabble over food and stuff. So the way that flocks form, we can actually chart it and find like the optimal size of a bird flock. Basically the relationship of like the time a bird spends scanning for danger, fighting amongst each other, and the time they spend feeding. All those relationships determine flock size. So the more birds there are, the less time you spend feeding because there's less food. The more birds there are, the less time you spend scanning for predators because everybody else is looking out. The more birds there are, the more time you spend fighting each other.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
A study in 2003 showed that in quail coveys, there is an optimal size of a covey. So if you're unfamiliar, quail coveys are something that forms specifically in fall and winter. So they'll hang out together in the fall and the winter. This study was done in Kansas, and they found that the range of the size was 2 quail to 22 quail.
that is such a
Huge
range.
That's so many.
Yeah. And they found in the study that larger coveys had reduced individual vigilance. So every bird didn't have to spend as much time looking out for danger. There was increased group vigilance, faster detection of predators, and they spent more time in exposed feeding areas because they had more people looking for danger. People? Quail. However, they found that individual survival was lower in small coveys and larger coveys. And the optimal covey size is only 11 quail.
Interesting.
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle. They actually found that in larger coveys, the quail had lower weights because there was more competition for food. So, yeah.
And in coveys smaller than 2, predation is probably an issue.
Probably so, yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit less time that you could spend looking out for danger.
Right. Speaking of the predator avoidance benefit of flocking, this may be a stupid question, but okay. Red-winged blackbirds, obviously, as we said, famously defensive, will pick fights with things that are so much larger than themselves.
Totally.
Do they display a, like, will they attack as a flock if there is a predator? Like, you know, because they're like colonial birds sometimes do that.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something like messing with the group, then they all kind of like go after it. Is that something red-winged blackbirds have been observed doing? Because again,
that's a great question.
I don't know that I've ever like sat and watched a winter flock for.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever personally seen flocks of red-winged blackbirds attack things, but mobbing behavior in flocks is pretty common and depending on the species involved, because it's really good to, number one, cause a commotion because that draws more attention to the danger, and you know, the straight up bullying can just make the danger leave, obviously. So I'm not sure about red-winged blackbirds, but it is a huge advantage of flocks. One of the biggest safety nets of having a large flock has to do with just making it harder for you as an individual to get caught. I think that's probably more the strategy of red-winged blackbirds.
The diffusion of risk.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously the closer to the center of the flock you are, the smaller your risk is. And we do see that flocks, when they're in danger, tend to be a lot tighter, so they'll like fly in a closer formation. So when you see those murmurations of birds, if you see them kind of like close up and become a tighter formation, they might be perceiving some sort of danger, or there might be a false call going through the flock and they're all just like, oh no. But when they're safe, they can be in much looser formations, and that's, you know, similar, harder to pick them off behaviors. Yeah. So safety in flocks is a huge important thing, and not only mobbing and, you know, the formation itself, but warnings, alarm calls, things like that are useful in flocks. It seems kind of risky to be the bird that blurts out when there's danger, but obviously we see this in a lot of other animals too, where, you know, the benefit is that everybody's doing the same thing, and the more attention you can grab, the less likely that predator is going to be successful. Some birds don't even use alarm calls. They'll use other signals like head bobbing. If you watch a flock of ducks or geese, instead of giving alarm calls, they will head bob to communicate danger. And so, you know, if you see a bunch of ducks about to take off, they'll often be like swimming away and like head bobbing, like, oh man, look at that guy, he's coming. So that's how they will, you know, sound the alarm. And there are birds that take advantage of, you know, alarm calls and sort of cry wolf if they want other birds to leave for a minute and give them the space to eat more food. There have been observations of like mixed flocks of sparrows where a bird will kind of do a false alarm and the other birds will scatter and it'll like gorge down a few seeds.
Amazing.
But there's, you know, disadvantages to calling wolf too many times. Obviously, we all know the adage, and that's certainly true for wild birds too. So not a great strategy all the time.
That's so fun. I wonder if there's any birds. So there's the birds that cry wolf. I wonder if there's any birds that just like refuse to call and they're just like waiting for their partner to like flush before they do, you know? They're like, I'm going to be selfish. I'm just going to hope really hard that coyote doesn't get me before Bob calls first.
I mean, probably, right? Like there's got to be variation in the behavior. So, you know, I'm sure there's some birds that are more likely to sit tight and not sound the alarm than others. But yeah, we see overall that birds tend to cooperate because that's the primary advantage of being in a flock.
Sure.
I also want to point out feeding in flocks because, okay, yeah, they're all fighting over food, but it is advantageous to find food by being in a flock. Birds that, you know, are chasing down their food can have an advantage. If you're following other birds that are also trying to hunt things, if a prey animal flushes, then they can swoop in and take advantage of that. So that is a strategy some birds use. This is not Kansas specific, but ground hornbills in Africa will walk in a line across a field to flush out prey. to catch insects specifically, which is ironically a method that grassland bird biologists use to find those birds. So, that's pretty fun.
Amazing.
Also, there's just so much information sharing that happens in a flock. There have been experimental studies showing that, for example, experiments show that titmice in captivity, if there's 4 of them, they will find more hidden food together than they would alone.
It's nice. Just in a small group.
Yeah, even a small number of birds, there can be a big advantage to having more eyes searching out and more cooperation and more information sharing.
It's fun.
Makes sense. Yeah. Teamwork.
Teamwork.
Yes.
Another important part of winter flocks is that these flocks are frequently mixed species flocks. So usually what happens is there's like a nuclear species in North America. A really great example of that is chickadees and titmice. And this nuclear species attracts other birds. If there's woodpeckers in the area, if there's like sparrows, if there's, just anybody nearby, even crows can get involved sometimes. Those follower species will just kind of join up with the nuclear species when they get the opportunity and work together across species. Obviously, there's a lot of benefits to this. And one of the main ones is that you get this sort of advantage of having a flock without having to share your resources or your space with your own species quite as much.
Okay.
So,
That makes sense. Yeah.
like a woodpecker is going to be doing different stuff and looking for different stuff than a
Right.
titmouse, but they still then get to spend less time searching for danger. This has been proven experimentally. Like, we know downy woodpeckers spend more time eating and less time looking for danger when they're in a mixed species flock. And these mixed species flocks can be so advantageous that there's even in Central and South America completely unrelated species that co-evolve the same colors to promote group cohesion in a mixed species flock.
Oh, that is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in breeding plumage or just like their non-breeding, like winter time?
They're breeding plumage, they're non-breeding plumage, like all season.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Okay. Interesting.
Makes me wonder if like North American species that flock up do similar stuff, because a lot of them
Yeah.
are like, black and white and
Yeah.
have those sorts of things going on. Like, is that also some coevolution of, mixed species flocking? I don't know.
Amazing.
Pretty cool.
The little brown birds look alike on purpose.
It's
LBBs.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little less standing out there. So yeah, pretty cool social mimicry. And that's the kind of stuff you have to look forward to in winter. You've got a bunch of different birds all gathered together and lots of chances to see them. In grasslands, you'll see blackbirds, obviously, horned larks, slapland longspurs, waterfowl, sparrows, waxwings, woodpeckers, all kinds of birds taking advantage of little microhabitats all around. So
Some of my very favorite birds are only here in the winter, which makes me sad because I don't like going out in winter, but they do motivate me to take winter walks.
I was just going to remark that Nicole is insane for not liking to go outside in winter. It is
Wow.
the superior time to experience nature. It's calm. The weather is great. It's like a nice restorative, quiet, contemplative experience being in nature in winter, and not dealing with sweating constantly just by walking out your front door, like just like opened the dryer too soon.
yeah,
Yeah.
extremely advantageous. And that's a really good point, Nicole, because yes, it is your best chance to see a lot of birds. Like, there's birds out in winter that you will not see in the summer.
Yeah.
I have a list of them. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Ducks, geese, gulls, and loons.
Whoa.
Nice.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. We have ducks all year, Rachel. No, we don't. If you think that, you're insane, because like we have maybe 2 or 3 species at best, right?
Yeah.
In the winter, we have the entire roster of ducks.
Yes.
There's so many. There's like 14. I don't actually know the real number, but there's like a lot of duck species out there. You can see sea ducks
Yeah.
in Kansas. Fantastic. A lot of big birds of prey that people like to look out for. Best time to see them is in winter. Only time to see some of them is in winter. Northern harriers, eagles, rough-legged hawks, red-shouldered hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, which
Yeah.
are not here during the summer, and short-eared owls and prairie falcons more likely to be seen. So, get out there.
Yeah.
Yellow-bellied sapsuckers, not here in the summer. Go outside and look at woodpeckers.
Yes.
I don't care if you think you see them all year. Go outside. Kinglets and creepers and winter wrens. Not going to see those all summer. Hermit thrushes, mountain bluebirds, solitaires. Better go out in the snow if you want to see those guys.
Yes.
Gotta do it. Purple finches, pine siskins, long spurs of multiple species, and also lots of little rare vagrant birds that get lost from the Arctic that sometimes dribble down into our region. Gotta look out for them. And may I point out, finally, that this is the only time of year to see a lot, I would say most, of our sparrows.
Yeah.
So, you're sitting here thinking, oh, little brown birds, like, blah, 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 blah. No, they're not even here in the summer, okay? So, calm down, go outside, look at them. Savannah sparrows, juncos, all of the Zonotrichia species, that's our white-throated, Harris's sparrows, all of those guys are not here. Fox sparrows, American tree sparrows, they're only here in the winter. So you see those winter bird feeders and you're like, wow, boring birds. No, that's the only chance you have to see them. Go outside and look at them.
Yeah.
Also, you get to see some really cool, unique bird behaviors, like your towhees that are around. Spotted towhees, by the way,
Yes.
more common in winter here.
Yes.
Very pretty.
You get to see them there's leaves on the ground, right? So they do fun little scratchings down in the leaves. It's a really fun behavior. We have charted out how they're able to do it. They pop up in the air and they scooch their little legs backwards.
Yes.
And then they'll be like, ooh, what's there? It's very cute. There's
is
so
one of
much
my-
rustling in the leaves and it's all birds. All the rustling in the leaves is birds.
That's one of my actual favorite birding memories is spotted towhees after a fresh snow. And they were just out in the slightly, snow dusted leaves and just doing their
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my God. And you know
Really
what?
lovely.
Because they're all in flocks during the winter, they're a lot easier to stalk because they're just hanging out in the bushes and they're less afraid of you because they've got all their buddies around, all watching out for danger. So they feel more bold and it's easier to stalk them. And there's no leaves.
Yeah.
It's the best.
It's true.
Thank
Very
you.
Conspicuous. Yes. Easy
my
to
God.
sneak up on.
Yeah. The only downside is that it's cold out, but
Not a downside. Again, I cannot stress that enough. That is the main draw of winter birding for me.
Well,
you get to wear you get to wear a nice sweater, put on
Yeah.
a cozy scarf, get a warm drink, warm beverage, and just, live your best life. Okay. You don't have to worry about mosquitoes,
oh my
all
God,
this
that's so true.
nonsense. Yeah. You're great.
Yeah.
I guess poison ivy is still out there and still a problem, but whatever, just
That's
you're
fine.
fine. And there are technically still ticks in the wintertime
Yeah.
because
All right, well, we don't need to get into the
right.
negatives.
But the point is, it's way, way better.
way better. There's definitely way less ticks.
Yeah, that's
We're gonna
true.
freak the entire audience out
No.
saying that there's ticks out in winter.
Well, I do want them to know how hard it is for ticks to die because
Yeah.
they are extremely cold hardy. But
Yeah.
anyway, we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about birds.
And we're officially in a different hardiness zone now because it doesn't get as cold as it used to.
That's very true.
Yeah. But
Back
for
to
those,
birds.
Yep, okay. Anyway, so those of you who are a little bit like, oh, I don't want to go out in the cold or whatever, or if you're like, oh no, okay, I have one tip that will help you get out there more, and that's wear wool against your skin.
Yes.
Because if you wear cotton, you might get kind of damp.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the best way to keep yourself comfortable when you're outside. Whether you're just moving so much that all your warm sweaters are making you sweat, or you're out in the snow and it's getting a little damp, just don't wear cotton. Wear wool, which is, superior anyway. So
Indeed.
there you go. Problem solved.
All right.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so just quit complaining.
Just go outside. And if you really don't want to go outside, at least put up a bird feeder. We'll talk about bird feeders at the very end.
Yes.
Yeah. So then you can get all your good winter birds in the winter from the comfort of your kitchen or whatever. Great. Winter is also the time for one of the most important counts of the year, which is the Christmas bird count. Christmas season. Forget about Santa and presents. It's time to count birds. It is the yearly census of birds in winter. Are there breeding bird surveys? Yeah. I guess. But
What? Yes.
There definitely are.
Is that what you're talking
no,
about?
no,
Okay.
there for sure are. Yeah, there's breeding bird
It just
surveys.
seems-
They're very important.
It's a weird thing to deny the existence
No, I
of.
wasn't denying the existence. I was just minimizing its importance.
Okay.
Just kidding. But I shouldn't do that because it is a very important survey.
It is.
But the Christmas bird count isn't also a very important survey, and it is a citizen science survey, which makes
Yes.
it much more exciting for birders. It takes place from December 14th to January 5th, and they started back in 1901, which means, at least in the eastern United States, we have like 120 years of data
Yeah.
gathered from birds in winter. And all that data has been digitized now. So if you go to the Audubon website, you can view annual summaries of birds dating back to 1901, the scientific studies that have been published from that data, maps tracking trends of species for every decade across their range. It's kind of amazing the amount of information we've gathered about birds from these Christmas bird surveys. And, you know, we've talked about this before in the Harris's Sparrow episode, but it is the only time that some birds like Harris's sparrows even get documented because they haven't been able to get them on breeding bird surveys. Breeding birds are harder to observe.
Yeah.
So Christmas bird counts are really important censuses.
Especially Harris's sparrows.
Yeah.
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 Aren't they the one whose like breeding grounds was so extraordinarily remote that it was not even discovered until fairly recently?
Yeah.
Like
Within decades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
in the subarctic. Yeah.
And we still have yet to have a successful breeding survey of them. So
Yeah.
all of our data about that species comes from Christmas bird counts,
Nice.
which is
Insane.
wild. Yeah. If you're unfamiliar with the Christmas bird count, basically from midnight to midnight on the day of the count, everybody gets together and counts birds.
Yes.
They count species and numbers. So if you happen to have a flock of like hundreds of geese or ducks, you sit there with a scope and you count every single one. Now,
Well, you can make estimates.
you make estimates, yeah, for sure. Yeah, you make estimates. You look for individual species. It all happens in a circle that's got a 15-mile diameter, and every single bird in the circle is counted to the best of your ability. They also will include birds that are seen or observed within 3 days on either side of the date, and those birds will be counted as like seen in the area, but not on count day, so that if there's some species that didn't get detected on the count day, they can have them on the list. And there's actually been some pretty shocking information that's come out of Christmas bird counts. For example, the IUCN Red List listed common grackles as near threatened in 2018 based
For
on
real?
CBC data. Yes.
Wow.
That is actually shocking.
Yeah, it is actually shocking. They found analyzing CBC data. I actually listened to a podcast from the American Birding podcast. That's the name of the podcast, where they Nate Swick interviewed the scientists who did this study. And that was a pretty shocking discovery. And analyzing the data, their populations had declined like 50%. So
Wow.
Is this a bias in sampling area though? Because what if more people are doing Christmas bird counts in like parks and like
And not a
nature
parking
areas
lot?
and not parking lots? Yes, that's like
Oh, that's a really good point. And I think like our bias is showing here because Kansas
Yeah.
is an area where their population has increased slightly. So they seem more common to us because they are technically more common here in
sure.
Oklahoma. But across the entire range of them, there's a marked decline. So, and you know, people who do counts make a point to try and find all of those locations. Like if there's certain parking lots where a lot of birds are, they'll count them. Because I know I've been on counts where, you know, people go to Canada Goose hangouts because, you know, people take these counts very seriously. They take their little patches very seriously.
absolutely.
And while they are definitely trying to get rare species, they're also trying to do like a pretty, you know, solid census of where the birds are.
Yeah. And not just taking, not being careful not to just ignore the hundreds of robins or the hundreds of geese.
No,
you want an accurate picture of what's there.
Exactly, for sure. And with CBC data, not only do we have bird information, but we have birder information. So they're able to account for like how many people were surveying that year, how many routes did they take, and that sort of like sampling bias too.
Nice.
Other surprising finds, house sparrows and starlings have had extremely pronounced declines too, according to CBC data.
Really?
Yeah, like even more pronounced than like birds that we'd consider to be more rare than house sparrows and starlings. So that's, pretty interesting. And
like
there's
every bird is more rare.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. They're like the most populous birds on Earth.
Right. Yeah. So that's, pretty amazing. And, there's studies trying to look at like, is it because of land use? Is it because of like, habitat preferences changing in birds? Like there's all sorts of ways to analyze this data, but we're still trying to figure stuff out. Also last year, northern bobwhites and loggerhead shrikes were pointed out as being some of the steepest declines in most regions. And officially from last year's count, like even their former strongholds, they're now seeing marked declines in those species. And we don't even understand why loggerhead shrikes are declining. But that's something that CBC compilers are aware of and trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know what makes me angry?
What?
That grackles can get attention from the IUCN, but prairie dogs can't.
That is kind of wild.
Anyways.
Well, there's no CBCs for prairie dogs.
Yeah, nobody cares.
Yeah, maybe you should start a Christmas prairie dog count.
Well, do it on Boxing Day or something.
Yeah, it's going to be hard in the middle of winter. They're all hiding.
That's true. Well, we just need to, get people rallied behind them the way people rally behind birds.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I know what you're thinking.
What are we thinking? Tell
You're
us.
thinking, wow, it sure is nice to go outside in a nice, warm, cozy sweater.
Yes.
And spend like a few hours outside. But like, how do birds get through winter? I can see it in your eyes. You were both thinking that for sure. Well, you're in luck because I have compiled a lot of really interesting information about how birds manage to get through winter in harsh conditions outside. Are you ready?
So
Yes.
ready.
Number 1, they have feathers.
Whoa.
Hold on.
Back up.
I know. Shocking. Okay, but actually, feathers are really good insulators, both in hot and cold. And like to this day, down from ducks and geese is still the most efficient insulation known to mankind, natural or synthetic.
Dang.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, it does lose all of its insulating properties if it gets wet.
Yeah.
So if you have like a duck down sleeping bag, don't get wet. But good news, if you're a bird, you are waterproof.
Nice.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So that's a
Yeah,
great
that
way
tracks.
to stay not cold in winter is to not be wet in
Yeah.
winter.
Nice.
And water resistance is something that all birds have in common, not just ducks and geese and things that are in the water. Do you know how birds are waterproof?
Yes.
How?
They're hold on. Well, they can preen their feather surfaces, right, to be like relatively solid and impermeable, but
True.
also like they produce like certain sorts of like hydrophobic oils that they preen with as well.
True.
Is that part of it? And they're just also Nicole, you were saying?
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, they smear nasty oils and dusty shit all over their bodies.
Well, you guys are kind of wrong because
okay.
while those things do contribute to waterproofing in birds, it is not the reason that birds are waterproof. So
Okay.
prepare to have your minds blown.
Okay.
Bird feathers are basically Gore-Tex in the sense that It is the structure of the feathers that prevents water from going through.
I feel like that's what I was saying.
The beginning part was definitely that.
Yeah, that's what I
Just
was
less
getting
fancy
at.
words.
Yeah.
Well, it's specifically because like feathers have little barbs on them that keep the feathers all locked into place and like zip up and everything. So the spacing of the barbs is big enough that sorry. It's the spacing of the barbs is tight enough that water cannot flow through it or stick to the surface. So that's basically how Gore-Tex works too, is that the spacing, it's like structurally spaced out in a way that like water can't get through it or like doesn't stick to the surface either. And water birds have even tighter spacing of the barbs, which makes it even more waterproof. And that also makes the feathers stiffer. So if you have ever found a goose feather on the ground and you've picked it up and, run your finger over it, like they're very stiff. That's because of the Gore-Tex-y pattern being a little bit tighter.
Is this an example of, not biomimicry, but where we look at something and we're like, wow, nature did it really cool, so we're mimicking it in what we make?
I honestly don't know, but I'm going to say yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Definitely.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
What is the word
Probably.
for that? There's a special-
Bioengineering. Isn't
Yes.
that how
That
that's
sounds
called?
right.
I don't know.
That feels like it could be something else too.
That
I
could
don't
also
know.
be something else.
Who knows?
Bioengineering mimicry. There.
Yep.
All right.
Nice.
Now, can you think of a bird that does not have stiff feathers and has very soft feathers?
Yes.
Yeah.
An emu.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's okay.
Yeah.
I was
Correct.
thinking more like owls.
Oh, sure.
So
I was just thinking of like the fluffiest bird I could think of.
no, that's
Yeah.
good. I
Yeah.
like that your brain went there. I'm sorry that my question wasn't clear enough. But yeah, owls have pretty soft feathers, and that's like a silencing adaptation.
Yeah.
It also means that owls are very much not very water resistant, so they do get wet more often than other birds. So that's why owls tend to hang out in really sheltered areas when they're roosting. They find a nice little overhang. They'll hang out in
Yeah.
barns. They aren't
Cavities.
waterproof, so they gotta be sheltered. Nice.
Owls do look real pathetic when they get wet.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. And that's why. Also important to note, birds grow more feathers in the winter, which is wild. Songbirds have about 1,800 feathers in the summer, and they add about 600 extra downy feathers in the winter. So if birds look a little bit more poofy, they are totally poofing themselves up, but they also just have more poof. So
That's why.
that's not
That
just
is
in your brain.
interesting.
I had no idea.
So like their tracts of feathers have space for the extra feathers. They just don't grow them in the summer.
Correct.
And so when they put on their like winter plumage.
They're extra insulated. Yeah, it's like having vents in the summer,
Yeah, true.
and then they close in the vents in the winter.
Good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Fascinating.
Also, obviously, in extreme cold, birds will reduce their activity and just stay in sheltered areas. But to sort of like increase the sleeping bag vibe of their bodies, they'll poof out their feathers to trap extra heat, and then they'll tuck their legs and beaks into their feathers to reduce heat loss. And it's kind of like just like getting in your little downy sleeping bag and zipping it up all the way up to your nose.
No.
Amazing.
Good stuff. Now, there is a problem with being a bird, which is that some parts of your body are exposed to the air.
Mm-hmm.
For example, your beak and your legs.
Yes.
Right. So birds have a way to deal with this and not just die or get frostbite on their legs. First of all, they have something really cool built into their legs called let me start over.
Yep.
They have countercurrent heat exchange occurring in their legs, which is a great adaptation for heat loss. Alan's nodding like he understands. Nicole, have you heard of countercurrent heat exchange?
Is it like ostrich necks or no?
I don't.
okay.
Probably not.
It happens in a lot of different animals.
Yeah.
It's like in whale tongues, anything that's like taking in or has a massive cold exposure.
Yeah.
They typically tend to find this. And it's like an anatomical layout of
blood
Arteries and
vessels.
veins, yeah.
So basically what happens is in, for example, a duck's legs or any bird's legs, but in ducks, like their feet might be dunked in ice cold water, like literally ice water, right? So what happens is the blood vessels are arranged in such a way in their legs that the blood leaving the body that's nice and warmed up from their body is actually exchanging heat with the cold blood coming back into the body from the ice water. So you're obviously losing body heat as the blood goes out into the legs, but the heat is lost into the blood returning so that it's warming that blood back up and they don't suffer heat loss to the environment as much.
It keeps the heat as close to the body core as possible.
Yeah. Fun.
Yeah. So kind of awesome. It's also true that, you've seen birds tuck their beaks into their feathers. That's pretty common behavior in winter because that'll just, fluff up the beak because heat loss is occurring through the beak as well, obviously. So tucking your beak into your feathers will stop heat loss from occurring. But it's also true that birds in colder climates sometimes have smaller bills and feet to reduce exposure. And I'm not just talking about species. Like there's some species, puffins, giant beak. Nobody really knows why that's not causing them to lose a tremendous amount of heat. But in something like a song sparrow, there's a lot of variation in their range and a lot of variation in their beak and feet size. And it turns out that song sparrows further north have smaller beaks and feet than song sparrows in the south. And that's probably an adaptation to prevent more heat loss.
That's true. Cute. There's a word for this. Hang on. I gotta remember. Damn, I forgot the word for this. But there is a word for that allometric relationship of body parts get smaller in the northern ranges of things, or like Arctic fox legs. Yeah, tiny.
Very tight to their body. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. Red poles are a bird example that I think of too. Like they're a very Arctic little finch and their feet are basically non-existent. They kind of have they're like the hummingbird of sparrows in terms of their like leg to body ratio. Like their legs are just barely there. They're very difficult to band compared to other sparrows. Yeah. So that is a really helpful trait that they have. Now I have a few more ways that birds get through the winter. And then I want to tell you guys about bird feeders. But these extra little ways are just kind of delightful and they make me smile. So obviously getting through a cold night is a little bit harder than just getting through a day, right? Did you know that small birds normally, not just in winter, but normally lose about 10% of their body weight every night while they're sleeping?
Yeah, that's crazy.
That is insane. So it's very costly to sleep at night as a little bird. And a lot of smaller birds like kinglets can enter torpor overnight, which is basically like temporary mini like hibernation. They let their body temperature get lower and they slow down their body functions and they can use that to sort of get through an extra cold night without losing more than 10% of their body weight. They can lose up to 30% without having serious consequences, but then they'd have to, re-energize in the morning. Small birds, going back a little bit more to cooperation, we mentioned that there's like a lot of cooperation in birds in the winter compared to normal. When it's very cold, that's also true. And many small birds might even take shelter in empty woodpecker holes. They've documented up to 12 different little birds in a pile inside a woodpecker nest. So when you're out on your winter birding walks, if you see any little sparrows or birds that have like bent tail feathers or slightly like askew tail feathers, they may have spent the night being the bird at the bottom of a pile. So look out for that.
Amazing.
Oh, that's so nice.
And of course, birds that have access to things like trees to shelter from will, shelter on the side of a tree that has less wind on it. Brown creepers are known to roost communally, and they will form a little circle with all their heads together.
Oh my gosh.
Which is very cute.
Yes.
And of course, for grassland birds that are out in open fields, It's very difficult to like find real shelter. So if it's a really windy or snowstormy sort of day, they will find shelter somewhere, and they'll all point their little beaks in the direction of the wind so they can use their aerodynamic bodies to let as much of that cold wind just sail right past them instead of buffeting them in a winter storm.
Nice.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do brown creepers roost just on the side of the tree?
Yeah.
What?
Cute little guys.
Weirdos.
Creepers are kind of weird.
I mean, I love them. Like,
Me
it comes
too.
from a place of love. And I know I've seen them, be bopping up the side of a tree, but I never thought that they would just roost.
Just lock
Like,
it in.
yeah, just, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they
Fascinating.
might take shelter in woodpecker holes
Yeah,
and stuff like
sure.
that too. But yeah, I mean, they're very well camouflaged, so you might as
Yeah.
well just like, cling to the tree and just hang out there.
Wild.
So that's all I have for you on how they survive the cold. It's nice to be a bird out in the winter.
Don't they also they experience significant physiological changes in their internal anatomy as well, don't they, during the winter time? Their hearts they do that for migration too.
Yeah, they do
everything
it.
kind of shifts around, some organs get much larger.
Yeah,
Does that happen a lot in the winter? The hearts get bigger and
absolutely. So some of all of their reproductive organs will atrophy during the winter, so that reduces weight for migration and continues to be true during the winter time. So there are significant physiological shifts. Of course, they put on a lot of extra fat during migration, and a lot of birds will burn through that on their way to winter grounds, but some of it might linger into winter. And, we don't really think of fat as being a lightweight energy storage solution, but fat really is a lightweight way to store energy compared to sugars and things in your blood. So
for sure.
birds will try to stock up on fat, and that's stored in really weird places, in the clavicle
Yeah.
nook, that little dip you have in your collarbone. That gets, in birds, it gets full of fat, and you can see it if you have a bird in your hand.
Yeah, the bubble.
Yeah. So yeah, there are physiological changes, and some birds, change their coloration too. A lot of birds will have a second molt during the winter and will take advantage of that second molt to completely change their color. Things like goldfinches will turn into a much drabber shade of olive than that bright lemon yellow we're used to seeing. So they're not only growing 600 new feathers, they're growing an entire new body's worth of feathers and blending in a little bit better.
I just think it's neat. Yeah. How you get teeny tiny songbirds that weigh an ounce. But they're just they'll be extremely active on the absolute coldest days of the year.
Oh yeah.
Just bouncing around the snow. It's so just the adaptations there are really fascinating.
It really is. And in bad weather, that's honestly a really good time to look for birds. I don't know. It was raining the other day, and I went out and took a walk and saw so many more birds than I've been taking walks every day. And on the nice days, there were a few birds around, but on the rainy day, it was just bird city. It was nothing but birds out and about moving around, actively during the rain. And some of my favorite Christmas bird count memories involve birding in a straight up snowstorm where we're seeing just so many great flocks of birds, and there's so much activity, fox sparrows, waxwings, everybody out moving around in a snowstorm. They don't care. They're still doing stuff. So yeah,
Very cool.
it's much easier to be a bird in the winter than a person.
I did take a walk yesterday after you said man, the birds are really birding.
Yeah.
And so I did go out there and just all geese. That's all I found. I did there was 100 geese that landed on the trail in front of me as I was walking. So I was oh boy, gotta push through this.
Yeah.
But they were fine,
Yeah, and you know what? Speaking of geese, I said that there's a million more duck species in the winter. The same is true for geese, but not a million, more 4. You can find other goose species out there. There's snow geese and Ross's geese and things like that. Ross's geese look like snow geese, so you have to kind of look hard, but you can find all kinds of good waterfowl out there, and geese are neat.
Yeah, waterfowl birding is like if you're new to birding
Mm-hmm.
and you just want to see like a bunch of birds, like winter waterfowl birding is a good way to do it. You can see some really cool stuff.
Yeah, and the best thing about it is that they're like usually all in one place, so you can just kind of hang out, find a nice little sheltered area, get a scope or binoculars out, and just like scan the same flock of birds for like an hour and see so many different species.
Yeah.
Like if you stare at one long enough, you might notice a loon hanging out in a crowd. Like it's really cool. Even in, Kansas, winter storms and well, actually during migration too, like storms will blow birds all over the place and you'll get weird stuff popping up in the winter. So
Yeah, I think we went to Quivira a couple years ago, and yeah, the waterfowl there were insane at the time. It was really fun. You see so many
Yeah.
things all together. Wildly different sizes, also very fun.
Yeah.
You see like tiny little shovelers and like huge canvasbacks, and they're just hanging out together. And it's like, whoa, that is like 3 times the duck of this other duck.
the scale is wild.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to see a bunch of stuff all together at once.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. It's also true that if birds do get off course during migration and they end up somewhere super weird for the winter, they're very likely to just hunker down and just stay there and be like, oops, guess I'm in Massachusetts. And like that, they just spend the winter there. If they find a good spot where they can survive, they'll stick around. So, all kinds of good stuff.
Nice.
We'll just be there for your enjoyment. All right, now finally, we're going to end the note on some bird feeding stuff.
Yes.
I'm not going to tell you how to feed birds because you can just look up articles about that. What I want to do is I want to answer some frequently asked questions about bird feeders, concerns that people have.
Oh.
So, first of all, if you're putting up bird feeders and you don't see birds coming right away, don't panic. They'll find it eventually. They probably are just like finding so much food out in nature that, something about the way that they're finding food currently is more convenient and less dangerous than going to your yard. And you don't know what they're thinking. But eventually when food supplies begin to dwindle, they'll come to your feeder. So they'll find you at some point. Calm down. It'll be fine. Great. So I have 3 questions, and I'm going to ask you guys what you think about the answers.
Okay. Oh god.
Question number 1. Does feeding birds get them killed by more predators? Does it make them easy pickings for more predators compared to being out in the wild?
I would say that while that may be true with mammals and things, like habituating them to food sources that are not natural can be very dangerous for them.
Yeah.
I would think that birds are an exception to that. And except if you, well, yeah, but that's my, I was going to say, if your feeders are popping off so much that you start attracting hawks to your yard, then that could be a problem for them, possibly. But I think in general, it's probably fine, right?
I would agree with that. And I'm sure that there are ways to mitigate that. Like, don't have your bird feeder in the middle of an open field where a hawk could swoop in and take them really easily. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, you guys are correct. Yeah,
Oh.
the pressure is insane. But yeah, studies have shown that predation at feeders is actually lower than in natural settings. So the thought there is that it's that sort of flock mentality of a congregation of birds is going to be able to look out for predators more, even in situations where sharp-shinned hawks or Cooper's hawks are stalking the feeders as well. It's still a lower predation risk than other places for the most part. However,
Oh god.
where there's bird feeders, more babies die. But that's not like a predation thing. That's actually kind of an indirect effect where bird feeders tend to attract birds and chipmunks and things that like to eat babies out of nests. Like blue jays and crows and grackles will murder baby birds in other birds' nests.
Sure.
So that's just sort of an indirect impact of having bird feeders around.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But in winter, no babies. It's fine.
It's fine. Guilt-free.
Yes.
Okay. Second question. Does having a bird feeder stop birds from migrating?
No.
There's no way.
Yeah, you're right. So, I mean, that's a concern people have, especially with hummingbirds. But no, in fact, the opposite is probably true. If there's bird feeders around, they're probably able to stockpile food reserves and like fat faster, which makes them capable of leaving faster. So, it's not going to affect migration.
Well, like you just said, if they are starting to really rely on feeders, then in the general habitat, there may be like slim pickings, so that probably is like motivation to,
For sure. And that, means if a weird stray hummingbird shows up in the winter and you've for some reason still got a hummingbird feeder out in November, it's not that your feeder stopped the bird from migrating, it's that the bird got blown off course or something, and it's like, oh, thank goodness I've got access to food. And then it'll move on when it's able to.
Right.
Okay.
Also, migration is just not resource driven primarily.
Yeah.
There's so many other things that
Yeah.
Literally,
That's exactly it. The studies or all the data shows that it's everything else affecting migration except resources.
Okay.
Sunlight, daylight hours,
right.
whatever.
Yes.
Cool. Finally, this is a real concern people have. Will your bird feeder make birds lazy?
Oh.
Will it stop birds from doing regular bird things? Will it make them too lazy and reliant on your handouts?
Nicole, what do you think?
I mean, I'm gonna say no, but I like to try to, maybe on the surface this question seems silly, but I mean, when you think about like animals being like re-released into the wild, like feeding them after you release them is an actual concern.
Yeah.
So
no, I agree that it is a valid concern to have. I think that the language is very funny, the way that it was written about in some of the books I read. But it is a real concern.
Either way, how is this being studied? How do you determine a bird's laziness? You know,
By looking at survivability.
Oh, okay, fair. Yeah.
When in the presence of habituated birds, and then if you remove the feeders.
Ouch.
Okay.
Yeah. Sounds mean.
A little bit. But is it?
Does
it affect them?
I know. There's no way.
Yeah, it doesn't affect them at all. Studies show that even birds that live with feeders, like for generations of birds, because the feeder is so consistent, they still only use that like artificial food source for half of their food. No more than half of their food is coming from the feeder. So they're using natural sources even in those instances, and studies show that really artificial food is just a supplementation for a natural diet. And when feeders are removed, they do find that there is no impact on survival. Birds do just fine. If you've had a feeder out for like a decade and you suddenly take it away, your birds are going to be fine. Probably not what you want to hear. You want to think that like you matter to them, but the time when it really does matter and does have an impact on survival is in moments of really extreme weather events. For example, if there's an ice storm, having a feeder out with access to food can be a matter of life and death survival for birds.
Sure.
So in those extreme cases, that can be a huge benefit that will absolutely affect how birds are able to survive. So don't worry about, birds being affected in your neighborhood. They're going to be okay without you. And if there's an ice storm, maybe make sure to go restock your feeder so that the birds are able to make it through that event.
Yeah. Nice.
And that's the last little tidbit I have about birds in winter. So as you can see, birds are doing a lot in the winter, and it's a really exciting time to be paying attention to the outdoors. I know that for a lot of people in like cold climates especially, the winter seems sort of like a dead time of year. But it's an extremely birdie, like thriving time of year if you enjoy feathered friends. So I encourage you to get out and participate in that enjoyment of nature this winter.
That's right.
And don't feel like you need to be like a birding pro to do a Christmas bird count. Like all of the birders in your area would be just so ecstatic to have you along, and you can get paired up with someone that like is experienced and knows the bird calls and stuff like that, and you're gonna have a great time.
Yeah,
good learning experience.
Absolutely. If you're interested in getting involved in a Christmas bird count, if you just Google Christmas bird count your city or your state, the Audubon chapters or ornithological societies, whoever's running the counts in your area will have something available for you to find online and ways to get in contact with the coordinators and participate in those things.
Yeah.
Yes. Cool. And if you just stay home during your Christmas bird count day and count your feeder birds, that is also very important. Yes. I've, Christmas bird counts in Wichita often have like spouses or friends of the survey who are sitting at home all day watching the feeder for rarities and counting every single bird that shows up in the yard. So that's important too.
Here's a question though.
Yeah.
Because like I feel like I put out suet blocks, and I feel like there is one downy woodpecker that just comes by and massacres it like every day. How do I know if I'm doing a Christmas bird count that's
The same one.
the same one or not?
Oh my gosh.
Is this hurting the data?
That's a good question. I think that you just have to use your best judgment. I know for a fact that when doing bird surveys, birds are uniformly undercounted. We know from studies that when estimating flocks of birds, estimating individual birds that are coming by throughout the day, that we are not counting all of them. We tend to underestimate everything. So counting the same woodpecker a couple of times isn't going to harm the data at all. In fact, you're probably missing more if you don't. So,
Good.
use your best judgment on whether it's the same bird.
Yeah, I'm sure that's like, accounted for within the models anyway. So,
For sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Rachel. This was a real delight and a great topic for winter nature lovers.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Go outside.
Go outside.
There's no such thing as bad weather, only the wrong clothes, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's what we say.
Yep.
Don't be a coward like Nicole. Go outside.
It hurts my bones.
Aw. No. Oh, I had an unrelated thing, but this is, it's semi-related. How is the AOU going about renaming birds? Because like
I'm not
I want
sure.
to say
When
like
is that gonna happen?
yeah, when is that going to happen? And also, are they open to suggestions? I really feel like they should rename the Harris sparrow the tundra sparrow or something like that, because I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
And also make it like a
Exciting.
more awesome bird to see in the Great Plains. It's like, that's a tundra
Yes.
sparrow, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's such a good point.
It's so good.
I don't know. I mean, surely they're open to suggestions.
This Christmas bird count, immerse yourself into the birder world so you can rename all the birds.
yes, yes. Like
Yeah.
we should campaign for bird names that we think would be awesome.
Yes.
That's
Oh my
what I'm saying.
gosh. Yeah. If
Yeah.
John Oliver can campaign for birds,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we should be campaigning
If
for
John
bird
Oliver
names.
can teach the world what a puteki teki is,
Yes.
then we can, get people on board with Harris sparrows.
Yes. You mean tundra sparrows?
Tundra sparrows. Yeah. I don't even know who Harris was, but too bad.
Probably a racist.
Probably.
Thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this adventure into winter birds. Definitely check out the show notes in the description. Check out our website and the social media. Again, if you have $2 spare to throw our way, we would be forever grateful. And we will catch you again in a month.
Bye.
Bye.